Richard, how are you today?
I'm very good. I was thinking before I came in that I have such a strange, interesting, multifaceted background. It's very much like a Renaissance human being in music and art and literature and history. And it's enabled me to experience Bali in a unique way because I so appreciate the art and the sculpture that's here that honors a very old, integrated philosophy and religion that enables this environment to feel really very different than any place I've ever been. You find that to be the case too?
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Many people come here and they're like, oh my God, the people are so happy for the most part. And there's a kind of joy and a settled feeling here.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is partly the result of hundreds of years of dedicated integration with nature. But it's also nature responding back. We often think, oh, it's just us doing things. But there's a really beautiful feeling here of nature participating with us. And that's partly why I came here, because I wanted to experience a culture that had maintained that kind of conscious connection with the living aspect of nature. So yeah, I think probably the case with you too, yeah?
Yeah, I do feel here like I am a part of nature, and everything I see around is just a confirmation of that. When I was in the city, I felt like a little bit overwhelmed, I would say, by the structure of the city. And tall buildings. Here, I feel like it's a very spacious place. And sometimes when I look at the sky, I feel like my consciousness just expands by doing that. Yeah.
It's almost like living in an earlier historic age. That's how I see it. It hasn't been corrupted by city life and all the crazy ways that we manipulate nature today.
So why did you actually come to Bali? When was your first visit to Bali?
So 3 years ago, I came. It was right towards the end of the pandemic and the shutdown in the United States. And I had a beautiful home on the bay of San Francisco where I entertained quite a bit. And during the pandemic, nobody wanted to have parties and dinner parties, and everybody was in their little world. And I figured it was a great time to come here and explore. And friends of mine were coming here regularly, trainers and breathwork workshop leaders. And so they introduced me to some people here, and that helped for me to bridge the trip and land and have friends when I got here. And I got a chance to go from the south of the island all the way to the north shore and see where I wanted to settle for a while. And I settled here in Ubud because it's the artistic center of the island. And so that made sense for me, and I love the musicians here and the workshops that happen. And so yes, I've been here 3 years, and it's basically, I came here to explore, but I also found that it's a great place for me to do the work I'm doing now. So that's why I did.
So you came here to explore the island, but you liked it so much that you have decided to stay
for longer
here in Bali, and make it your home.
Yeah, for now. I've just taken on some new positions where I may be traveling quite a bit more, but for now, the base is here. Yeah. So I originally was from Ohio and spent many years in New York City and then in the San Francisco Bay Area. So coming here has been a big change, and particularly the area we live in that has no access by car even. So I love getting around on the scooters and feeling close to nature and not hearing even cars go by. So it's a very unique environment to do, particularly the kind of research that I'm doing, which is a lot of reading, a lot of writing, dealing with some of the themes we've been talking about. You and I have a common interest in hypnotherapy and unlocking people's deeper capacities and discovering. So that's been a wonderful chance for us to get to know each other through that. And as a result, we've gone a little deeper and realized that it would be wonderful to have these recorded dialogues rather than just us having them. So that's what we're doing.
That's exactly what I was meant to say. Because first time I remember I encountered you here, it was September, and you were sitting by the pool enjoying the nature, meditating. And since then, we've started having those amazing conversations, which I found very inspirational. And I thought it would have been such a shame not to share it with the others. And I remember you have told me at that time that you were reading about 7 or 8 books a week. Was it?
Not quite that many.
Not many.
But trying to get through 2.
2. Okay. Yeah.
And because of our new tools, I can identify the things that are significant to me very quickly in a book and then just read those chapters. So in the past, we had to skim through books, but today, because of these new AI tools, we can really identify quickly like what is relevant for the work that we might be doing. So that's been helping. So I have a huge library of PDFs that I'm getting through that deal with psychology, all kinds of historic books, books dealing with AI. Part of the research I'm doing is to craft what I would consider useful cosmologies for today's world, so that we not only have a worldview that embraces what happens today, but a worldview that includes the wisdom of the past, that enabled us to access the deeper, what we might call the superconscious or the universal mind. That access to that requires levels of preparation, levels of purification, dedication, even consecration. And without that kind of training that we have inherited from the past, I find that if that is not included in our worldview, then we're left to this very, what I consider shallow pop psychology today, which is very self-oriented and doesn't really enable a person to discipline their mind to be able to actually access directly what we could call the universal mind.
And
yes, I'm reading an unusual book by Wallace Wattles called The Science of Being Great. And this is a very interesting book written in 1911. And he basically works with a number of principles. The first one being what he calls a principle of power. That's within each of us is an inherent power that can enable us to unlock the potentials that lie within us. And so the book progresses from this acknowledgement that we can all become great, and then it goes step by step through the various things needed to train our thought, to aim for greatness and what that actually looks like from this more, what I would consider, mature point of view that includes the spiritual point of view, not just man becoming great in his social setting, but man becoming great in the sense of his participation with the divine purpose. So he and Rudolf Steiner, Neville Goddard, these are authors that worked within you could say a worldview that included these very deep, multi-dimensional spiritual insights. And so the Waddell's book, Science of Being Great, I'm reading just after reading a book by Rudolf Steiner called Intuitional Thinking, or Intuitive Thought. And that book really grounded me back into an understanding of the significance of valuing thought itself and not confusing the content of thinking, our thoughts, our impressions, our senses, whatever, with the actual power of thought. So we can place our thought into any number of settings and engage, like in reading or watching a movie or having a conversation. But when we value the quality of our thought itself, then we begin to realize that improving the quality of your thought leads to improving the quality of your life. Improving the depth of your thought becomes the tool for deepening your entire life. So these series of books that I've been reading, part of my gift is to sort of connect these dots, connect the connections between them for the purpose of understanding how to undo some of the collective hypnosis that has diminished the greatness of human beings. So I feel like we've allowed a kind of cowardly attitude to dominate society in which we've normalized just being mediocre, fitting in, and that's okay, just getting by, or the latest thing of survival being some kind of a good. But surviving and actually thriving are two polar opposites. And if a person really wants to thrive, there are very particular ways in which our thought can be trained. The first one being to train your thought to aim higher, to aim for greatness in your life and not just getting by.
So for someone who would like to actually have a greater thoughts, possibly it had been great to understand what a thought is and where does it come from.
Yeah, a lot of the first stages had to do with self-reflection. So if you do want to develop your thought of self, then there's a process of learning to value what is going on in your own thinking and to pay attention to it. And so we do that obviously through meditation or self-reflection or journaling. But beyond the content, I would say the first step is to really value that your thought is probably the most intimate aspect of your own reality. And there are many teachers who have said that man's actual reality is his thought. And then to own that, like, this is my thought and I value it. And if you do that even a little bit and start paying attention and commit to improving it, you'll find almost immediately that other people start taking you as a more valuable person. Because there's an intuitive sense that we all have with each other. And you could simply say, oh, I feel that this person values the quality of their thinking. Because even in, like, you and I can open up all kinds of beautiful portals because of the quality of our listening, because we've learned to value our own thinking. And so we want to take in from each other what might be not just useful insights, but insights into each other's way of holding our thought, which is a whole other level. So that's valuing the quality of a person's will itself. So there are many subtle aspects to this.
And the tools that you have mentioned.
The tools of self-reflection, meditation, these ideally lead to a kind of curiosity, where you then start asking, well, what kind of tools are out there for me to harness this power of my own thinking? And if you go into what I would consider fruitful training, your aim will be to use your thought in such a way that it starts to be in alignment with your soul, so that you're accessing the truth of the immediacy of life, the truth of the divine mind that we're all immersed in. This is a big piece of what's missing today, because we've lost this larger cosmology, this larger worldview. So for someone who wants to develop their thought, if I were training them, I would train them to explore these sophisticated worldviews. So the worldviews of deep psychology, worldviews related to religion, why the great poets were the way they were, what were they experiencing, what were they tapping into? Yeah, and really get curious about that. And then test for yourself, because self-knowledge is real knowledge for us. And so when you take on these disciplines, this is where valuing your own thought needs to be established. You don't get lost in like, oh, I've got so much to think about and I've got so little time. No. Take a few things, go deep, value what's happening inside of you. That would be my advice in the beginning.
That sounds great. And it's the observation of the thoughts. It was my actually first practice that helped me a lot to be with now, because when I constantly was doing practice of really focusing on what I'm thinking, I realized that some of my thoughts are definitely not in thoughts. And sometimes I will hear my mom, but obviously that thought will come me in my own voice, but I would recognize that's exactly how my mom would talk to me when I am procrastinating, which was a shocking revelation. It's like, wow, how much of the thoughts are recorded kind of on a tape that goes inside of the mind. When we hear the inner dialogue with ourselves, some of those voices, some of those thoughts that are definitely not ours, is the society, teachers, parents, grandparents, friends, books that you've read, movies that you've seen, all of that. Right?
Well, this is where we have the content of our thinking, and then we have thought itself. So whatever thought you're thinking can have this various types of content. But the deepest level that I find people are skipping over is no matter what it is you're thinking about, it's your thought.
So you can be the architect of your own thoughts, and you can decide how long you're going to think about something and what kind of thoughts, what's going to be the process, right?
Yeah, so you're working in the realm of thought before you work in the world of action, so to speak, because the actions flow from the quality of your thinking. So if you want to change your life, instead of running around changing the outer things, that many great teachers have said, start with your thinking, change your thinking. Get clear about, so even jumping to what it is you want often doesn't work very well for people because they just get confused with the content. And then that becomes distracting, and then they don't have the power to focus their thought in such a way as to actually create what it is that they want. Make sense?
Yeah. So if they choose the right thoughts, they can achieve their reality, right?
And the process of that choosing, the point I'm making is the process of that choosing occurs in the realm of your thinking. And you have to make it effective, you have to first value that this is your thought world. This is a very particular, unique world to you, to each person. And this is where, because of our schooling and our social acclimation to each other in this culture, we've tended to jump over that valuing and that ownership of how miraculous it is that we have thought at all. That this is a kind of miraculous dimension that humans occupy. And when we harness that thought with the intention of becoming a great person, then that thought has a focus to becoming great. Once that's in place, then all this content can then have a magnetic center around which the content then helps to form even more sophisticated thinking in terms of the content. But if the valuing of the thought process is weak, then a person is content to have scattered thinking. They're content to have fragmented worldviews. They're content to just get by because their mind is just jumping from thing to thing to thing to thing, to impression, without really valuing the thought process and owning that as the tool to become a great human being.
I remember you told me, you said something that actually changed my world view. At that time, it was about 3 months ago. It was something that you'd said, something about what is my worldview. And I've realized that it had changed since a while, and I've stopped thinking of what my world is now, or more than that, how would I like my world to look? Because my world is my bubble. It's not what it is you're telling me. It's not what my friends are telling me, right? It's my own space that I create on every day through the thinking process. And so I had to reflect on that, look around me and realize, oh, well, it's been 5 years since I'm in Bali. Before I meet here, I had a different thoughts and different views, and I was creating a different world. And it's time to change it. It's time to look at the world, what is around me, open my eyes again, and just revaluing things, seeing what how my cup was, what have I achieved until now, what can I do more to be a greater human, to be more of service to people. Have I actually realized all my goals that I planned for the next 5 years before I moved from London? And that helped me a lot. So it kind of blew my mind, because I realized I haven't been doing it since quite a while. It's like realizing that creating the world, and every day we can expand our thinking, we can re-question things, because we are shaking it every day, right?
Yeah, I became really interested in this as I was studying the idea of worldviews. And I began asking my friends in California, where do you think you are? Where are you located? And for the most part, people did not even understand the question. And I began to realize that this issue of the worldview had become a non-issue for most people. It's just something we don't think about. But in the not-too-distant past, if you were in a community that had a different worldview than yours, people would feel justified to actually kill you. It was that extreme. So there was an understanding that the worldview you held was not just significant, but possibly the most significant thing in those worlds not so long ago. So then what happened? So partly what happened is we went into, I can't go into all the details, but we went into a progressively more and more narrow kind of education without, how can I put this, without, it only took about one generation to forget that this narrow education came out of a particular worldview with very specific agendas. And so then we were left for the, since the early 1900s, we were left with an educational system that was entirely materialistic and anti-religion completely. And an even deeper problem in America was that it was anti-family. So you would be indoctrinated into this system in which your connection, even to your own family, was minimalized. So you would go through, 12 sets of teachers, and no teachers were ever asking you about your parents. It was irrelevant. And so you're in these environments of training for preparation for the world, and you're basically being given these subtexts of messages that your family is not significant. The world is not religious or spiritual. Your teachers are even irrelevant because you're only being tested on information. So I'll give you an example. Like you go through 12 years of school and then into college. And there's never, and there may be unusual examples of this, but for the most part, there's never a single question on a single test that says, how do you feel about your teacher? So you're being programmed to value only the information. And then when people get older and they come to Bali and they want to have a spiritual teacher and a life that is spiritually oriented, they have this very dominant bias that the information is what's important. So then everyone shows up here and they're like, what can I learn? What do I need to know? So what's missing is all of these teachings that are in these spiritual communities in Bali, not the local communities, but the yoga schools, the tantra schools. These are coming out of traditions that had at their heart communion with actual teachers, a living lineage. And so that becomes, it's worse than irrelevant, it becomes completely invisible. That whole way of connecting to a lineage becomes invisible. And then people just want the information. Make sense? And so we're left with what I would consider a very incomplete kind of training that's coming from this bias of these massive educational systems that still perpetuate this kind of narrow, very materialistic kind of education.
While in India, it's more connection to the guru that comes first. Is it the healing? It's always from the books I read and from visiting India. It felt like every student was connected to the teacher through the feeling. There is a respect, of course, and I'm pretty sure all the teachers you have mentioned about and the educational programming was about respecting the teacher and not questioning and to receive an information, as you mentioned. While in India, it feels like there is a spiritual connection first. There is a trust in a guru. There is a law. And then the knowledge is passed. So
the huge part of the lineage value is the quality of love that is handed from teacher to teacher. And so one of my teachers, Ram Dass, is very good at describing being loved by his guru. And his sort of, how would he put it, that for him, the horrifying realization that his guru knew everything about him, all the flaws. And so this was rather horrifying to him. But the guru is looking at him with this mind-boggling love and acceptance. And that shattered his worldview, because no one had ever done that with him before. And I personally got to experience a similar thing with him personally. And this is what initiated me into this value of paying attention to the living lineages, not just the information. That these traditions had so much love. And even people like Rudolf Steiner and the man who wrote the book I was describing, The Science of Being Great, the attention to detail, the willingness to go into the minutiae of what might be holding us back as a human race, This is coming from what I'm experiencing now as a quality of love that these authors had for humans that, frankly, today I don't see that much of. That this overwhelming sort of dedication and consecration of their lives to the betterment of human beings. In the case of Steiner and Wallace Wattles, of the training of our thought with such detail. And this is, for anyone who's a writer, this is a very difficult process to go through, to spend the time to go into the minutiae, especially what Rudolf Steiner went into. And in the end, I began to realize, oh my God, they could never have done this without this incredible love for us as a human race. So then that begs the question of how did that happen? How did they hold in their hearts this kind of flame of love? And that's where you get into this dimension of touching the divine mind itself. And even Wallace Wattles affirms that there is no real greatness in a human unless they're touching the infinite universal mind itself. And that becomes a kind of living river inside a person that they can then access. And what he's doing in the book is training you to master your thought so that your thought can align with the divine thought itself. And this is really what the spiritual path is this process of alignment in a worldview, what I would consider a complete worldview, where the human is aligning his individual thought with the thought of the universal, oceanic, divine thinking.
So it's been compared to a Wi-Fi connection to the source.
The source being a kind of perfect, limitless, loving intellect.
That we can connect through our thought.
Exactly.
Through the divine thought. And having all his teachers for the lineage of many generations who are cultivating that thought, we can actually tune in and receive the fullness of the divine.
Right. And this is where that will never happen if you don't value your own thinking first. That's the arena in which that kind of participation is going to happen. It's going to happen in your thought. And if a person wants to be inspired in that way, then there are stages of training that need to be in place. You don't just wake up one day, some people do, they'll have spontaneous inspiration, but it's not necessarily consistent in any way. So they might go 5 years, 10 years, 20 years until that happens again. But if you take on the training of purifying your thought, of aligning it with the divine teachers who have laid out incredible ways in which to participate, that are not out of the realm of any person taking that on. This is not like you have to be a PhD to understand these things. It's very understandable, but it takes, to me, what is has been, in a way, deliberately removed in our education system is this ability to experience the significance of your own sovereignty, that you have control over your thinking, and that control is so much a miraculous gift from the divine, the universal mind, that we have been imbued uniquely as humans to think our own thoughts, to direct our thinking. And in the directing of our thinking, we either direct it towards just fitting in, or we direct it to greatness. And we take on great things in our life, whatever that may be, in relation to the gifts that we might have. So a musician who wants to become great must train his thinking in a very patient, progressive way so that he can attain mastery. And so initially, a lot of the early thinking that's valuable for a musician is to think of the end first. Think and feel into what it will be like to perform and thrill audiences. And do that over and over and over and over and over. And that's a very particular, beautiful kind of life. And I've been very fortunate to live that kind of experience where I was on the stage for over 2.5 years performing for large audiences, like 8 performances a week, every week. And this kind of lifestyle is absolutely heavenly because you're expressing yourself in a joyful way and thousands of people are enjoying what you're doing and you have a crew of people working with you and fabulous life.
So easy. First time when I had a deep conversation with you, and I remember I was sat down to see cafe nearby, and what I could feel, what I could sense to me is the presence. I could literally feel the presence. And I'm very curious, how did you come to that statement?
Yeah, so there were 2 early experiences that shifted me from a kind of normal upbringing in Ohio to a more expanded view. And both of them happened in California, even though I was currently living on the East Coast. I had a trip to California, had what many people would consider a kind of divine awakening, a very direct awakening. And it was a kind of deja vu experience where I was shown the divine mind saying to me basically, not in words, but behold what I can do. And then I knew it was going to happen 20 minutes before it all happened, and then I saw it all unfold. So this was a very unusual initiation. A few days later, I was taken to a meeting with Ram Dass, who had just returned from India. And at the end of the meeting, I had an opportunity to be with him in which he worked with me to see layer after layer after layer after layer of my social personality and went right through to the core of this divine kind of identity. And when that kind of experience happens and you are able to hit that root level, there's a kind of seeing in which I could see the face of God in him, and at the same time he was seeing the face of God in me. And this is a particular, what's called a pathway of love, where the beloved is seeing the beloved through the eyes of a human, two humans. But it's one identity. The beloved is seeing the beloved in another human, but it's recognizing itself. So that's a particular kind of blessing that also has a price. And the price was that I would rarely see that again for years and years. And when you know that that's possible, you tend to look for that. There's a kind of yearning. Can I see that again in another person? And I had to be willing to sustain a kind of loneliness and not fall back into my acceptance of a kind of mediocre life. And so shortly after that, I was initiated into the Baha'i community. And
How old were you?
19. And received training in what's the most recent of the major world religions from some of the most illustrious of the Baha'i teachers at that time. And from them, there was this transmission of love that was so profound and so joyful and so happy in the sense of like feeling accepted into that world by them was no small thing for me. And as I began sharing my music and sharing the studies, I was welcomed into a community life that, only later as I'm seeing the struggles that people have starting communities, that I began to really appreciate what I had been initiated into, which was a very sophisticated, global community, very healthy, spiritual group of people. And so that helped to form a support community in which I could explore and test different levels of teaching and expression and sharing divine wisdom with people in a living sort of way. So let me give you an example. So it's one thing to recall spiritual teachings. It's another thing to have these teachings arise in a kind of spontaneous way. And this is what I enjoyed about our conversations, is that we would both be sort of delighted with what was arising. And we could feel this shining of divine intelligence that, yes, would fit our shared lexicon of ideas and ways of expressing things, but which had its own life, a living life. It was radiating the present moment. So learning to value that was something that took me a while to acclimate to that when I was younger, and to test trusting that. And if you're blessed to be with even a relatively mature spiritual community, there's so much willingness to accept these kinds of experiments and not be judgmental about it. So that's a little bit about how that happened. There's also, getting back to this thing of valuing the how can I put it? It's a kind of, ideally, as this matures over years, it's accomplished by being very humble. This is what I find, is that the less we assume we know things, the better. And as one of my favorite teachers, Terence McKenna, used to say, nobody really knows anything. It's so beyond. The mystery that we're in, the miraculousness of anything happening at all, is so overwhelmingly mysterious that any how can I put this? Any assumption that we actually know really is delusional. And these delusions serve us in certain ways to orient, but ultimately it's delusional. And I recently saw a video, I won't go into details about this, but it was highlights of a conference, a spiritual conference, where people were very well intentioned. But I kept seeing this pattern again and again in the speakers of, we're doing this, and our chakras are blocked in this way, and everyone is that, and no one really knows what they want. And these statements of assumptions that I felt really, in a way, were not serving the audience, because the person was, these teachers, one after another, were presenting very disjointed teachings in this conference of a supposed revolution of consciousness. Many well-intentioned conferences like this. But there wasn't one person in that particular group that really radiated this, what I would call the humility of standing in the mystery itself and not assuming that we know what's going on. And in a lot of ways, I feel like that's what we need to be witnessing in each other, especially in teachers. That the teachers are willing to participate in the mystery in such a way that they're actually not in any superficial way, but really deeply humbled by the confrontation itself. So if anyone's ever been, in the presence of any of these great beings, whether physical or not physical, it's an overwhelming feeling of humility, an overwhelming feeling of, you could say, being outclassed, because some of these beings are so immortal, have been existing for so many thousands of years of perfecting love, like on levels that, it's just beyond. And so how can you not be feeling humble in that setting, right?
I think it's like, again, is the presence we have radiates love and acceptance and compassion, right? And sometimes perhaps seeking on the side of greatness and peeling off layer upon layers, a better approach rather than pointing out what is wrong. Because we are all born great. It's some other way until we are not programmed. Because if you look at a baby and you look deep into their eyes, he can reconnect the source same time.
Yes.
And the level of innocence there, the level of love, it's beyond any description. And I'm just talking about it, and I feel like my heart is very expanding with that. And
Well, I just want to acknowledge also with you that your choice to be of service to people on such a deep level and be willing to work with people with the tool of technotherapy is very profound. And that you've nurtured also in your practice an obvious, very deep, intuitive listening. And this is partly what I value our conversations. That listening has a very sheer quality. Yeah. And maybe you could talk about that, like how that changed you.
Yeah, I used to be the person who interrupts in my 20s, late 30s, as well, mid 30s, until I learned how to listen because I understood that I can really better come back. People would usually speak, and then while they're listening to you in a dialogue, they would already have the next question, or they would already have something prepared what they would love to say, of their perspective, or their history or experience. So I realized that I do prefer not to know what are going to ask next. Because the conversation then expands, and as you said, it has its own, it becomes an entity. There is more of an intelligence in there and profoundness. So I absolutely love to listen, and I have been practicing to listen consciously or actively, as we say, to a person, because it's beautiful to feel the person, to understand, and the amount of knowledge that could have been passed in that way. It's tremendous. And there are a couple of tools that I'm using. And so now, like the human design game, which is based on human design and agile case, have helped me to expand in that active listening. I do feel that it's supporting my expansion. And also I do feel like it makes me a way better person because it's supporting each other in a conversation rather than jumping and sharing. And only waiting for that moment to express ourselves. There is so much more to find out with an active issue.
Yes.
Yeah. It's beautiful. It is a beautiful practice, and I believe that's what should have been introduced into schools properly. Yeah. Into
Yeah, unfortunately, we have this 3 main lessons that are part of our associate grade school, which are just so counter unlocking human potential, which is basically sit down, don't move, right? Sit down, be quiet. Okay, they're shutting down your speech, they're shutting down your movement. And then I think the worst of all, it's give your attention to the stranger at the front of the room. Pay attention to the teacher, right? And so you're programmed in this like strange way to acclimate to this very particular kind of training that causes you to become dominantly reactive rather than she on your own. And you don't, even until you later in life, have pretty much any support to initiate. Even your own learning, you're taught to be reactive. So to me, this is just a nightmare. And probably the only reason I escaped from that system in Ohio because I took on my first mentor in 60 through his book called Education in Ecstasy by George Lane. So George went on to write many, many books, and every one of his books I read and had, each book had a strange synchronicity for me as I was growing. And later in life, I got to meet him and have the experience that not too many people seem to have anymore, where you get to meet an actual hero of yours, a truly great author or a truly great person. And so that was one of the great moments of my life, was being in this actual physical company. And Jim and the Intaxis books had on me. But that particular book painted a picture of a future education, which kind of in a full circle way, I'm participating with in a new company that I'm working with right now. And it has the environments that pay attention to every subtle detail of the beauty, structures you can move. So it's a very sort of full circle process where you come back work into this educational system that we can utilize in these new ways to unlock the potentials of human beings, which we're just at the beginning. This idea that somehow you've got access to your supposed full potentials, it's actually a flawed idea. There's no such thing as your full potential. Because every time you actualize the potential, you turn it into a real power. It literally creates more potential.
To towards your potential.
Yeah. With no limit. There's literally no limit on the actualizable potential of what you can become. And that's why they use this language back up until last century, that we can become gods. And we become so in alignment, so empty of our limited thought, and we learn to align and participate with divine, we become living instruments of God. And in a sense, we become gods. Through that alignment, through that participation. Which gets back to our original idea. It was literally, it cannot be done if you don't first value the thought that is arising in you to begin. And personally, I've been working on a set of trainings that can take someone through stages of these worldviews. And what I am offering in not too the future is every level of access, all the way up to these ways in which you are placing your mind inside the divine revelations
And in the class of texts, this is referred to as the living city of God. That these revelations are considered a show architecture of the mind of God. So when you enter the earth, hold these teachings in your consciousness and live in them and explore them and how you might use them in your life, whatever is unfolding to occupy that level. This is a particular kind of heaven. And so I'll be making that kind of program for people. And then I'll also be using, and we'll talk about this more, is the use of hypnotism to open a person to that kind of participation.
And even receiving that energy, the frequency,
Yeah.
that divine.
The encounter, when you're in these revelatory utterances, a speech of God, a word of God, there's an inescapable realization that, yes, you're dealing with energy, but that's only like the first level. That the levels above this go into levels of self. That is an inescapable realization. You're dealing with a coherent thought of a coherent being.
And when you say self, is it the high self or is it the ego self?
See, when you're dealing with divine revelation, I have to give you examples of sort of how we best meant to go to this right now. But we could do a whole video on this, but there's what I found to be a very significant loss in our collective understanding. And the loss has to do with the understanding that a huge aspect of our cultural development collectively has come from what used to be referred to as the will of God. It was revealed through the prophets. So the entire legal system of America and most of Europe is based on Judaic and Christian. And without that foundation of moral structure that came from those teachings, we would not have the legal system we have today. The Bill of Rights, the American Constitution, this is all based on even the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness coming from God, not the government. See, so almost all of these structures that we're ruling on have these religious foundations. And the idea of the separation of church and state, which is also part of our structures, isn't that they are separate. It's a separation that prevents the government from determining what you should do. It's actually protection. So that the government is not telling everyone they have to be Jewish, or telling everyone they have to be Christian, telling everyone they have to be poor, which governments could do, and some of them did do that. But in the United States, the society to protect that can happen. However, the foundation in relation to this will, God, is inescapable. It's a part of what makes the fabric of our culture. So, as I began to question people about the cosmology, I began to realize that this idea of the reality of the will of God itself being real was no longer an issue for people. It was a non-issue. Nobody thinks about it. And so if you say to someone in our modern sort of spiritual community, do you want to be close to God? And they'll say yes. And then if you say to them, what do you actually mean by that? Nearness. That's when they'll talk about energy frequency, which are the attributes of good. But there's a big missing piece where in the not too distant past, if you said that, like if you said that to the 1,400,000,000 Muslims, do you want to be close to God? What does that mean to you? They would say it means aligning with the will of God. Very specific. And this is where the understanding of history is important for anyone who wants to become influential in their world. If you don't understand these historic sources from which our culture has been created, you're at a loss to navigate within that culture. So once you begin to realize that the will itself is missing as a theme in our culture, then you begin to realize that a deeper problem is that if you don't acknowledge the will of God, it's impossible to acknowledge the self of God. It is doing the willing. You follow?
Yeah.
So it's almost like you have to lift your thinking into an acceptance of this great lineage of the revelation of the actual will of God, to then have this more, what I would consider wonderful realization that on the other side of that magnificent, like mind-boggling will that's created the entire universe and all us, a more subtle level is in this quality of self that's so aligned that it's engaging its will to create. And so this is a kind of progression into the self of God that inevitably, when you start to understand that dynamic, and then you actually listen to what that will is telling us, when the will is giving these teachings of reflect upon yourself so that you may know me as the divine. This is where, by knowing ourselves and the attributes we acquire, we know the divine and the attributes that are divine. So in the Sufi world, for example, we have sight so that we can understand the name of God, the all-see. And if we didn't have sight, we couldn't understand that God was the all-see. If we didn't have hearing, we couldn't fathom that the divine is the all-hearing. It would be impossible for us to understand. And we're given all of these amazing gifts to know the divine through ourselves. And so this is a very foundational, obviously a very foundational teaching, where we tend to lose track. We can't track the level of the teachings. is where we jump accept the will of God be real. So if we reflect on what is our own will, and we realize, oh, if someone said, where is my will? I would have to confess it's completely invisible. It can't be seen. Right? Yet it's totally real to me. And from my will, it radiates all my actions, whatever. So when you examine your own will, then you can start to accept that there may be a will that's also visible, that's radiated from a being, that can't be seen, just like your own will can't be seen. And the same way, if you said, well, where are you? As the willer of your will, you'd have to confess you don't know where you are. Because we're not our bodies, we're some kind of other level reality that in a way is completely beyond space and time. So this is how we discover through ourselves the nature of God, if that's our aim. Yeah. But this can only be accomplished through a humble attitude toward these magnificent bodies of teaching that will come to us, able ages. That needs to be valued. Because on our own, especially in this culture, what classically is called the veils that are in the way are so strong and dominant that it's almost impossible for someone to advance really into these realms of the same life without these levels of preparation, purification, welcoming of all these different traditions, humility, and ultimately the really applied discipline to your own thinking, where you consecrate your thinking to your soul level, and that your soul is also dedicated to different. And so these are compiled pieces. Words. Hold on a second, just going to check. I'm tired. It's 1 hour, it's 1 minute. I think it's 8. So just you want to wrap up, Rabba? Or what shall I ask you a question? Maybe some advice? I'll tell you, after seeing that conflict, you have you first mentioned about the tools. So, Richard, so far you've mentioned about the tools of how would you suggest whoever would like to cultivate the tools, where to begin with, right? Like meditation, self-reflection. What else would you add to that? I think just being curious, staying really curious. We can share more about our own life stories, but I think for each person, there's a deep sort of principle that we have, each of us within ourselves, the power to move into these areas of greatness. And this is indeed principle, it's a spiritual principle that this power is there and that you can trust that power. This is innate in you, just moves you forward. Okay? We've been made in this gigantic, beautiful lattice matrix of the universe. And within us is power. It is yours. And when you trust that power and you test it, which we should do, is a self-knowledge, spiritual test. Speak out loud what you want. And then be patient and watch the world organize itself around what you want. This is the power of how we initiate our growth. Initiating the growth is one part of the piece, and the other part of the piece is receiving the God that helps you. It was initiating, and then they're allowing yourself to be near. And then you initiate another level, and you allow yourself to be. So this is the asking and receiving. These are very ancient teachings. Ask and we shall receive. But we must receive, obviously. And then ask again. And this is you engaging in that principle of power that you inherently have as a human. Everyone has. And so never doubt that you can or can't do something. Don't be in doubt. Just trust that power. And that's how we move ahead. That's how we develop. And I would say the only other thing is to be mindful that most people have been programmed in a worldview of separation. And that this is not an accurate worldview. As you explore deeper levels of spiritual development, it becomes very obvious that we're in a world, you could say, of inter-being. Everything is participating with everything else. You must mind-boggling system of connection. And that's what I love about being involved in back to that. There's an honoring of that interconnected, an honoring that we are supported by the forces of nature, we're being supported by the world, supported by the rain. And offerings are made to these elemental forces every day by the thousands here. Quite beautiful. And so that radiance of thankfulness that you're participating in an interlocking, interdimensional reality is quite rousing hearing about. And it's here everywhere that here are people are just aware of that reality.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Pleasure to have my first ever podcast with you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your faith in me.
Thank you, Victoria. You're beautiful listening.